Hi everyone, Laszlo Montgomery once again with another China History podcast, our 97th. Everything produced to date is up there on the website at chinahistorypodcast.com anytime you want it. I've also been listing all the Chinese terms mentioned in every podcast on the webpage for your inconvenience. Feel free to check that out if the names in the podcast become too overwhelming. I listed them all out for you with pinyin, characters, and an English translation. Today we're looking at the I Ching, the Book of Changes, the Classic of Changes, also known as the Zhou Yi, the Changes of Zhou. Well, it goes by a lot of names, but those are the main ones. I think after the Bible, and maybe the Quran, the I Ching is the most published and widely read book on the planet. It's certainly one of the oldest ever written that's still in existence. Depending on which expert you listen to, the I Ching is almost 4,000 years old, but more popularly, I hear it's closer to 3,000 years old. Like the Bible and the Quran, the I Ching, in its some 4,100 characters and 64 chapters, dispenses sound moral advice that someone might find specifically relevant to their problem or situation. It's most widely used as a divination system that a lot of people swear by, as people swear by tarot cards and palm reading. To divine comes from the Latin divinare, to foresee or be inspired by God. This was the art of tapping into the divine will, or in this case, the Tao. In its finished and standard form, the I Ching has stood as a comprehensive philosophical treatise on how our lives and everything around us undergoes change. There's no rituals or prayers. The I Ching is not read like a book from start to finish. It's more a work that is consulted more than it's read. The I Ching differs from, say, tarot cards that try to open a door to the future. The I Ching serves as a guide that advises you a recommended course of action for almost any life situation you may encounter, and it's concerned only with the present. Who are the main characters involved in today's story? You've heard them all before. We've covered every single one of them in podcasts CHP 15, 16, 17, and number 60. These were Fu Xi, the evil Shang Dynasty ruler Di Xin, Zhou Wen Wang, Zhou Wu Wang, Zhou Gong, and the Zhi Sheng, the great sage known as Confucius. These are the main characters today, and they all played a part in writing or shaping the development of the I Ching. So we'll look at all that, and you can get a free refresher course on this period, just in case you forgot. We're looking at the period where China's first dynasty, the Shang, is on its way out, and one of the lesser-known states to the west of the Shang, known as the Zhou, was starting to assert themselves. Their king was named Ji Chang. 2 of his 10 sons were named Ji Fa and Ji Dan. These 3 men, surnamed Ji, were respectively King Wen, King Wu, and the venerable Duke of Zhou, Zhou Wen Wang, Zhou Wu Wang, and Zhou Gong. Playing a walk-on role in this story is Di Xin, known better as King Zhou of Shang. That's Zhou, 4th tone, different character from the 1st tone, Zhou of the dynasty. This wicked King Zhou, who soon would garner the infamy of being the last king of the Shang and would serve as a role model for worst emperors who deserved to be overthrown. You remember the Shang is the dynasty preceded by the mythical Xia, for which we have no smoking gun, proving its existence, but that's what we said about the Shang too until the dragon bones started showing up in the 1800s, and everyone who was scoffing at Sima Qian regarding the Shang had to eat a little crow. The spelling handed down to us from Sir Thomas Wade, the first Chinese professor of Cambridge University, is the spelling that is most commonly associated with the I Ching. The character I is written as the letter I in the old Wade-Giles romanization system, and the Ching is spelled Ching. In the modern pinyin system, it's written Yijing, I Ching. In English, the I Ching has several names. You mostly see it called the Book of Changes. It's also called the Classic of changes because the Jing in I Ching means classic work or a canon. The Chinese character yi, fourth tone, means change. So the Book of Changes, or Canon of Changes, some incorrectly call it the I Ching, because of the way it's spelled. It's recognizable to the public using the Wade-Giles spelling rather than the pinyin, so most books leave well enough alone. The I Ching, a very well-known work that a lot of people have heard of. I may be reaching here, but I think the I Ching is one of those works that almost everyone has heard of, but very few actually know what it is. Outside China, that is. Sort of like Lao Tzu's Dao De Jing. The fame and reputation of the work seems to be more well-known than the actual content. Lao Tzu, by the way, was an avid believer in the I Ching. Today's podcast isn't about how to change your life using the I Ching, but rather instead to give you the history behind it and a very simple overview about what it is. Then from there you can have an idea what it is and then decide for yourself if you want to know more and take it beyond this podcast. What is the I Ching and where did it come from? As the story goes, it all began with Fu Xi. You all might remember Fu Xi from the CHP episode 60 on the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, the San Huang Wu Di, the mythical rulers of China during the period of prehistory. Fu Xi lived, if he lived at all, that is, from more or less 2953 to 2838 BC. This is old. The Indus River Valley was just starting to see its first traces of human civilization. Even the ancient Egyptians in their day called this period ancient. It's still a few centuries before Egyptian pharaohs would start building the pyramids that we can still see today in Giza. Minoan civilization was just starting to get underway. Fu Xi lived in the times described in the Bible. If Noah could have walked in the footsteps that Marco Polo would one day walk, he might have been able to meet Fu Xi. So, more or less, 2800 BC, Fu Xi receives the 8 trigrams, the Ba Gua, from some divine source. There are many versions of where the 8 trigrams came from. Like many ancient texts, it's difficult to credit one person with writing it. Not only is there no solid evidence who wrote the I Ching, China's scholars can't even agree when it was written. 2800 BC, 9th century BC, even in the 20th century, we can't say for sure when this book of timeless wisdom was written. 8 trigrams, Ba Gua, and 64 hexagrams, Liu Shi Si Gua. That's how it all began. What's a trigram? What's a hexagram? The prefix tri and hex tell you the numbers 3 and 6 are involved. 3 and 6 of what? This is where we drag yin and yang into the mix. There are 3 lines in a trigram and 6 lines in a hexagram. We'll come back to that in a second. Fu Xi gave us the trigrams. Yu the Great, some say he took the 8 trigrams and turned them into 64 hexagrams. Yu the Great, of course, heir to the legendary Emperor Shun, Yu the Great tamed the floods and went on to found the legendary Xia dynasty. That's the thing about the I Ching. Even in the time of Confucius, the I Ching was already quite old. So much about its origin began during a time when there was no recorded history. And you know what happens when there's no absolute proof of something. Anyone could say anything, and who's to refute it? This ancient aspect about the I Ching lends additional weight to the mystery of this ancient book of divination. That's how it started, as a divination manual. The oldest manuscript in existence has come down to us from the Warring States period, which preceded the time of Qin Shi Huang. He was the last one standing in 221 BC when the Warring States did battle with each other. Like the Dao De Jing, the I Ching isn't a straightforward linear narrative that tells a story. Not at all. It focuses on the dynamic balance of opposite forces and the inevitability of change. Then people use the I Ching to tap into this force and find out what's in it for them. On an extremely simple level, that is. In looking at the I Ching, this ancient book of changes, you have to accept that change is a constant force that never lets up for a second and affects everyone and everything all the time. The ancients taught us how to use the I Ching to understand the nature of these changes, how they affect you, and then it offers you advice for whatever it is you have on your mind. So back to the 8 trigrams, the Bagua. They represent the 8 interrelated concepts: heaven, earth, thunder, wind, water, fire, mountain, and lake. There's 2 ways to arrange these trigrams. There's the way Fu Xi did it and the way King Wen did it. More of the all-important King Wen later. So you have the Fu Xi polar arrangement of the trigrams and later the King Wen version of cyclic arrangement. These trigrams are the most basic unit in the I Ching. There are always 3 lines in a trigram. 3 lines. These lines are either broken or unbroken. That is to say, either it's an unbroken straight line or it's a line with a break in the middle. If you can't picture that, think of the South Korean flag. You might be familiar with that. It's got that blue and red yin-yang symbol in the center with the 4 trigrams on the top and bottom, left and right. These are the 4 trigrams for heaven, earth, fire, and water. You can also see an example of what a trigram looks like if you go to my website at ChinaHistoryPodcast.com and click on the episode for the I Ching. The way the math works is that there are 2 ways to write the lines, broken or unbroken. And there you have 3 lines, right? So that becomes 2 to the 3rd power. 2 times 2 times 2 equal 8. No matter how you slice it and dice it, there are only 8 possible combinations to write these trigrams. These are the sacred 8. No more, no less. Each trigram has a name and a meaning, an attribute, a symbol, as well as a family relationship associated with it. For example, the trigram that has 3 unbroken lines, one on top of the other. Its name is Qian. Its nature is Tian, or heaven. Its season is summer. Each trigram, or gua, has a personality, and this one is creative. The family relationship associated with this gua is the father. It stands for the southerly direction and has a meaning of expansive energy and the sky. Let's take another one, the Li trigram. This one is a solid line on top and bottom with a broken line in the middle. This one has the nature of fire, season of spring, personality is clinging, and the family relationship is the middle daughter. The direction is east and contains the meaning of rapid movement, radiance, and the sun. I know this is a lot to take in. There's all kinds of charts and whatnot available that make this all crystal clear. A hexagram is created by joining together 2 trigrams. Tri means 3, hex means 6. So 2 trigrams equal a hexagram. A hexagram, therefore, is made up of a lower trigram and an upper trigram. Again, if you do the math, of these 8 trigrams, there are 8 times 8, or 64 possible ways to join 2 trigrams of broken and unbroken lines together into a unique hexagram. So 64 hexagrams. These combinations of lines and broken lines. Of these hexagrams, there are 8 that end up being written the same, no matter you invert them or not. Turn it upside down. But 56 of the hexagrams are simply 28 hexagrams that are inverted, turned upside down, to form a total of 56. That's 28 plus 28 equal 56. So you have the 8 that can't be changed, that are the same, whether they're upside down or whatever, plus these 56 equals 64. The key to understanding the I Ching is locked up inside these 64 hexagrams. Each hexagram symbolizes a life situation. Each hexagram has a brief description. These are known as judgments. There is also a short explanatory text for each of the 6 individual lines of the hexagram, and these are known as line statements. These are attributed to the Duke of Zhou. The judgments are attributed to the Duke of Zhou's father, King Wen. The hexagram is further broken down as follows. The 2 bottom lines of the hexagram symbolize the body, the environment, the world, everything you are in this world. The 2 middle lines represent the subconscious mind, and the 2 top lines represent your spirit. And these lines found in the trigrams and hexagrams, what they symbolize are the forces of action and change that occur all around us constantly. Not just all around you. I mean, in the whole universe. The whole grand scheme of things, if you will. Now, the whole idea of yin and yang, you're familiar with that, the iconic yin and yang symbol. This is all part and parcel with the I Ching. There's two kinds of lines you see in the trigrams and hexagrams. Like I said, straight and broken lines. The straight lines represent yang, and the broken line is the representation of yin. As I said, the I Ching focuses on the forces of change. Nothing is static. Things change over time. Our task on this earth is to adjust to the circumstances of life as they unfold before us. The I Ching exists just for this reason. By understanding the forces of yin and yang, these mutually dependent opposites, and the forces they have on our life, you can be better in tune to deal with whatever crossroads you come to. You just need a little advice. That's where the I Ching comes in. Yin symbolizes the shady, secret, dark, lunar, mysterious, cold, hidden, passive, receptive, yielding, cool, soft, and of course the feminine gender. Yang, on the other hand, is the opposite of everything yin. With yang, you have clear, bright, solar, hot, illuminated, evident, active, aggressive, controlling, hard, and of course the masculine gender. Many other forces are attributed to yin and yang, but the important thing to know is these are all opposites working together as one whole single system. Yin is earth, yang is heaven. The whole world is viewed in the I Ching as a system of interacting opposites. These opposites do not fight with each other. Instead, they complement each other and work in consort to bring about change. If a trigram consisted of two rows of broken lines and one straight line, you say this one has more yin than yang, and then two straight lines and one broken line, more yang in that trigram. Trigrams, 3 lines. Hexagrams are 2 trigrams, one on top of the other, therefore 6 lines. And you always, without any exception that I know of, count the lines from the bottom up. The bottom line is the first line, bottom to top with the I Ching. Now, let's drag Mr. Ji Chang into this episode. Ji was the family name of the Zhou Dynasty kings. Ji Chang later went on to put everything in motion that led to the demise of the Shang Dynasty. Then it's his son, Ji Fa, who founds the Zhou and reigns as King Wu, Zhou Wu Wang. Let's just call Ji Chang King Wen from now on. I think you get the picture. This is all rehash of episode CHP 16. He was the king of the small, insignificant state of Zhou to the west of the Shang Dynasty lands. King Wen got in a spot of trouble with the Shang evil emperor Di Xin, a.k.a. Zhou Xin. He had King Wen thrown into prison, and inside this prison, King Wen works out the individual judgments that were associated with each of the 64 hexagrams. Some accounts say it was during this stint in prison that King Wen came up with the 64 hexagrams, but as I said, it's also attributed to Yu the Great, as well as others who came before King Wen's time, which was about 1099 to 1050 BC. This is why we remember King Wen. It was his older son who delivered the knockout punch to the Shang Dynasty, and it was his younger son, well, he had many, but he was the younger son, who we remember as the Duke of Zhou. We featured Zhou Gong in CHP episode 59. So, Zhou Wen Wang, King Wen of Zhou, fathered 2 amazing and great sons who did things in China that we're still talking about 3,000 years later, and he arranged all the hexagrams in a particular order and gave us the judgments. I don't know, we could call them the fortune inside the 64 cookies, if I can dumb it down any further than that. This was a major step forward for the I Ching. Even today, we still use this King Wen sequence of the 64 hexagrams. And then the Duke of Zhou, well, he got in the act also, and he gave us the Yao Ci, which explained each individual line of each hexagram. 6 lines per hexagram. King Wen gave us the judgments, or the explanations of each hexagram. This is called the Gua Ci, but it was the Duke of Zhou who took it one step further and broke it down line by line of the hexagram. Again, this is called the Yao Zi. If you have 64 hexagrams each with 8 lines, that comes out to 4,096 different combinations of outcomes. 64 times 64. And at least back then, that covered every possible situation that could have possibly arisen in anyone's life. But wait, it doesn't end there. Then, the last one to take a crack at the I Ching is none other than the great sage himself. Confucius was a 70-year-old man before he felt he was old enough, mature enough, and wise enough to take on the study of the I Ching. And he lamented in his old age in the Lunyu, the Analects of Confucius. The great sage says, quote, "If some years were added to my life, I would give 50 to the study of the I Ching, and might then escape falling into great errors." The great contribution of Confucius to the I Ching, and sort of the thing that finishes it off, was known as the 10 wings, the Shi Yi. These are nothing more than Confucius's commentaries on the I Ching. Later, during the time of Han Wu Di in 136 BC, everything was standardized in the I Ching, and the 10 wings of Confucius, these commentaries, the Shi Yi, now called the I Zhuan, are then incorporated into the I Ching. In adding these 10 wings, or commentaries, to the I Ching, Confucius injected a bit of philosophy to mix and combine with the I Ching's cosmology of the fundamental unity of heaven, earth, and humanity. This is the text we now accept as the official standard text of the I Ching. The I Ching is considered first among the 5 classics, the sacred Wu Jing. These are the 5 classic books, along with the Si Shu, the 4 books that formed the cornerstone of the whole Confucian civil service exam system. If you could manage to soak up every single ounce of wisdom in these 5 books, you had a bright future ahead of you in the bureaucracy. These 5 were the I Ching, the Spring and Autumn Annals, the Classic of Poetry, the Book of Documents, and the Book of Rites. The 4 books, the Si Shu, I mentioned this term, were the Great Learning, the Doctrine of the Mean, the Analects, and the Mengzi, the Mencius. Those 4, plus the 5 I just mentioned, these 9, they are collectively the mold that shaped the development of the next 2 millennia in China. Their influence isn't seen much at all in today's China, but up until the Qing dynasty, when it started to crumble, these 9 books still had a rather great influence on the civil bureaucracy and how things were managed at the imperial court. The Han Dynasty was the first time the I Ching was really picked apart, analyzed, studied. By the time of the Han, the I Ching had reached its finished form, and Confucius had been dead for half a millennium. Up to this time during the Han Dynasty, the I Ching had sort of been limited to being a high-octane divination manual. Philosophers during the Han period began to view the I Ching as a guide to divination, as well as a work that combined moral philosophy with cosmology and numerical speculation. By the time of the Han, the I Ching had absorbed many Taoist and Confucian aspects. I had to fight for every C I ever received in math, so I can't get into the details, but there's all kinds of places you can take the I Ching if you can appreciate the math and the binary code that's involved in it. If you could follow the various numerical tricks, the I Ching is even more fascinating. Alas, don't expect Laszlo Montgomery to be able to explain it. You see, the Chinese, like other advanced civilizations, believed numbers provided the link between humans and how they were developing on this earth and with the great unknown, the supernatural, or the Tao, whatever you want to believe. With mathematics, there were ways to find hidden order and patterns amidst the seeming randomness and disorder of life. These 64 hexagrams represented situations and outcomes that had already happened, were happening, and would happen again. There were all kinds of ways to understand this and to tap into this whole power, to get advice on what path to take in life when you reach a crossroads. Spirits or hidden powers, when they spoke, used the language of numbers. And I'm sure you've all heard that when the day comes when we make contact with aliens from outer space, most likely it will be the language of math that enables us to communicate. One other thing, 1973, this is going to be a future podcast because it was a pretty big deal when it happened. The Ma Wangdui discovery, a more or less totally intact Han Dynasty tomb, was unearthed near Changsha in Hunan. I've mentioned this in a couple podcasts. I mentioned this in the three-part Taoism series. Perfectly preserved copies of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching and the I Ching, as well as, surprise, surprise, additional commentaries on the I Ching that no one in 2,000 years had seen or heard. So after all these years, something that had, since the time of Han Wudi at least, been considered a complete and finished document, now in 1973, the year Bruce Lee died, texts were discovered that unveiled additional commentary. In addition to that, this Ma Wangdui copy of the I Ching ordered the text in a completely different way. So in the world of the I Ching, this was a pretty big deal. And that's how it is in China. They're still digging things up that change what we always accepted as the official history. And this is one example. Another example was 1908, when Luo Zhanyu figured out that these dragon bones came from Anyang and figured out the mythical Shang dynasty wasn't mythical at all. Now, the I Ching today has sold more copies than practically any other title, save for the Bible. How did this thing gain so much popular acceptance? And I'm talking outside China, too. The man we have most to thank was the German Christian missionary Richard Wilhelm. He was a great champion of the I Ching who got the ball rolling in the West. He was the one who was primarily responsible for taking the I Ching from the exclusive realm of the Chinese and other East Asian cultures and bringing it to a very interested and appreciative Western audience. This audience in the West embraced the I Ching. The I Ching had a huge mega boost during the 1960s counterculture movement. People all over the world who had never heard of the I Ching began to use it as a dependable guide to advise them how to choose the best course of action, no matter the situation life threw at them. Wilhelm himself described the I Ching this way, quote, "It can best be compared to an electrical circuit reaching into all situations. The circuit only affords the potentiality of lighting. It does not give light. But when contact with a definite situation is established through the questioner, the current is activated and the given situation is illumined." But who influenced Richard Wilhelm? Surely he wasn't the first Westerner to discover the divining powers and philosophy contained in the I Ching. Surely not. We all know Westerners were turning up in China all the time, going back to the olden days, and during the Qing dynasty, there were foreigners galore thanks to the open-mindedness of the early emperors Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong. One of those foreigners, a Jesuit of course, always the Jesuits when we talk about the earliest Western scholarship of Chinese culture, Father Joachim Bouvet. He was one of 6 French Jesuits who came to China in 1687 on the orders of the Sun King, Louis XIV, to glean whatever scientific data and intel they could, bring it back to France. Bouvet became enamored of the I Ching from the start and dedicated himself to somehow, some way, find the linkage between the wisdom contained in the Chinese classics and with the Holy Bible. Father Joachim Bouvet died on John Lennon's birthday, October 9th, in Beijing in 1730. And this is where he was buried. When he sent a report back to Louis XIV, he said of the I Ching, quote, "This work contains the principle of all sciences and, put more precisely, it is a fully developed metaphysical system." Then later on in the 19th century, Western scholars of China began to realize for the first time how central the I Ching was to so many aspects of Chinese culture. The study really took on a new surge of enthusiasm. So on these shoulders, Richard Wilhelm in 1923 began working on his own translation from the archaic classical Chinese of the I Ching into modern German. He was supervised by someone with the pedigree of Confucius himself, someone of the Kong family who, when the work was completed, gave it the thumbs up. And coming from a descendant of Confucius was almost as good as getting it from the man himself. And it was later on in 1950 that this work was translated and published in English for the first time. And when another edition was published in 1961, to lend credibility and attention to the I Ching, no less a person than Carl Jung himself, the father of analytical psychology and a colleague of Sigmund Freud, he wrote the preface. So C.G. Jung, even in his day, with his work on synchronicity, was a pretty well-known and respected chap. His work in psychology was groundbreaking, and he's always mentioned in the same breath with Freud. In the 1960s, there was a major surge in awareness about his work. Then the 1967 edition of the I Ching, that was the third one, was one of the classics of the hippie culture of the 1960s. With the celebrity of Carl Jung's stature associated with the I Ching, copies just flew off the shelves, and it was on its way to becoming a perennial bestseller in who knows how many different languages by now. The last thing, unless I can think of anything else that I want to add to this little overview of the I Ching, is the mass market appeal of it. What does it do as a practical guide to divination that appeals to the masses, not only in China, but in dozens and dozens of countries around the world? In the works that I have studied, the experts are careful to emphasize that the I Ching isn't like a deck of tarot cards that predicts the future. The I Ching merely gives you sound advice to specific questions or situations presented to the oracle. It doesn't tell you what will happen. It just gives you other ways to look at the situation that assist you in making a decision. Now, the secret is all in how you interpret everything. You could ask a question, and the wisdom of the I Ching will give you a reply. And you could count on the reply being cryptic and open to different interpretations. Different I Ching masters will give you different answers, as they might have different ways in which they interpret the Guazi and the Yaozi of King Wen and Zhou Gong. And as far as the 10 wings are concerned, the commentaries of Confucius about the I Ching, that too is written in such a way that it can be taken in more than one direction. This is true with the science of feng shui. I'll feature this one day in a future topic. The 8 trigrams, the Bagua, are very closely tied to feng shui. And geomancers, or feng shui masters, use the 8 trigrams and the whole I Ching as one of their primary tools of the trade. In fact, for feng shui jobs involving death and burial, feng shui masters use the old Fu Xi version of the trigrams. Then for anything related to building and matters concerning one's office or residence, the later King Wen sequence, that version is used. I remember when we were remodeling the office in Hong Kong, at one of the places where I worked. My boss was a great believer in feng shui, and of course, consulted this very famous and preeminent master in Hong Kong. But this guy was concluding that my boss had to do this and do that, and break down this wall and move this fountain, etc. And I remember the discussion in the office, being, man, this Sifu is really going to cause a heck of a lot of disruption here with all these recommendations he's making. So I remember they got a different feng shui guy to come in, and he was a lot better. Put a mirror here, a mirror there, a couple of fish bowls, and some other things, and then it was official. We had good feng shui after that. How do people in their everyday lives use the I Ching? How do you get all those hexagrams? This is where the 3 coins come in. You toss the 3 coins 6 times to get the 6 lines of the hexagram. Each toss of the coins gives you a number. Heads are worth 3, and tails are worth 2. 3 heads equal 3 plus 3 plus 3 equal 9. And then there's a corresponding line that goes with these numbers, always straight or broken. That's how the hexagrams are generated. Straight line is called a dark line, or the yang line. The broken line is called the light line, or the yin line. Light or dark, straight or broken, yin or yang. one on top of the other to build 6 rows. It's really this simple. But like everything with the I Ching, simple but not so simple. But this is how you get the hexagrams. And from the hexagrams generated by tossing the coins, you consult the text of the I Ching, and it gives you a line-by-line analysis of the situation. Always from the bottom line to the top line. You read that, you get your answer or advice, whatever you want to call it. The 3 coins will give you a corresponding number, which tells you if it's a straight or broken line. Slightly more complicated than that, but you get the main idea, I think. This is probably leading a lot of you to say, come on, tossing coins, this is like Vegas. What does this got to do with tapping into the unseen forces all around us? No one from Missouri is going to believe this. But this is the thing. Yeah, it's 3 coins, and who cares? Could be dimes, nickels, quarters, euros, or Norwegian krona, as long as all 3 coins are the same. In the I Ching products industry, you have these fake, antique Chinese coins, like these old copper cash of yore with the square holes in the middle. You've seen them all. They have 4 characters written on them, not sure what they are. Mugu Gai Pan. These are popularly used also by a lot of I Ching enthusiasts. But don't laugh at this. In the grand scheme of things, there are no accidents or dumb luck. Anyone who, at any time in their life, felt things happen for a reason, they can't argue that when 3 coins fall, say, tails, tails, heads, that straight line that's associated with that specific number was purely an accident. Heads are worth 3, tails are worth 2. So, tails, tails, heads is 2 plus 2 plus 3 equals 7. 7 is a straight line. The powerful, unseen forces that the I Ching tries to reconcile cause that outcome. And it's related to the question you have. And this wasn't just random chance. Whatever the outcome, it was all tied together with the questions you were asking. When you generate your hexagram, you then have to interpret it. Now, this isn't like taking a slip of paper out of a fortune cookie. It's not that simple. The answer is revealed to you in the shape of that hexagram. Remember, 64 hexagrams. The I Ching is 64 chapters, 1 for each hexagram. You go to your hexagram chapter, and you see what it tells you, and you relate it to your real-life situation. That's really the key. Knowing how to interpret what the text says and relate that to your particular situation is really the key. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a massive topic. This overview, as any I Ching expert who might be listening would know, was merely the epidermis to a very deep topic. If you'd like to learn more, I have good news for you. There are millions of web pages out there that are related to this topic. There are books galore that explain everything and everything you might ever want to know about the I Ching. And did I mention YouTube? Check that nice little resource out also. The number of videos and documentaries explaining the I Ching are as numerous as the stars in the night sky. If you want to learn more, those are great resources to begin with. You see, a lot of what I'm telling you with trigrams, hexagrams, tossing coins, etc., it's hard to picture this in a narrative. You can really take everything I've introduced to you to the next level by checking out some of these videos. So that's going to be it for this one. I had a feeling this one was going to run a little long. I hope everyone who always wondered what the I Ching was is leaving somewhat satisfied. Hey, I know I have listeners living in Kunming and Yunnan. I hope everyone wasn't too shaken up by that Yiliang earthquake. I know this is just east of the capital, so I hope everyone is all right. I bid farewell this past Wednesday morning to my good friend and fellow history podcaster, Ray Harris. He came out to visit me here in Claremont and to congratulate me in person for my upcoming 100th episode. We had a little 1-hour chat here in the CHP studios, and I'm going to feature that for my 100th episode, which is coming up soon. Thanks, everyone who has made it this far. Confucius wished he had at least 50 years to study this great work, so I hope you don't think I was going to be able to slice it up and package it up for you in a 40-minute podcast. I encourage you all to go check out for yourself and see if any of the 3,000 or so years of wisdom can enrich your life. You can't believe how many people swear by it and not just in the Chinese world. So, from Claremont, once again, this is Laszlo Montgomery from the ChinaHistoryPodcast.com, wishing you all the very best, and I hope you'll join us. There I go again. I hope you'll join me next week for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.